Sheriff and deputy vanish on a night shift. 16 years later, an old outhouse gives shocking answers that change everything. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who crave the truth behind dark mysteries will do it before this story begins. The patrol car idled quietly under the low orange glow of a flickering street lamp, breath rising like smoke from the hood into the cold November night. Sheriff Wade Keller sat in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the tree line ahead, dark, motionless, and heavy with fog. He tapped the steering wheel with 2 fingers, steady but tense. Beside him, Deputy Ron Briggs adjusted his radio, frowning when it let out nothing but static. "Radio's cuttin' again," Ron muttered, giving the knob a frustrated twist. "That's the 3rd time tonight." Wade didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed at a shape barely visible through the mist, deep in Hunter's woods. "You see that?" he asked, voice low and controlled, like a man who didn't want to scare off whatever he was hunting, or whatever might be hunting him. Ron followed his gaze, leaning forward. "Could be a deer," he said, "or someone with a flashlight." Wade turned off the engine. Silence swallowed the cruiser. "We walk," Wade said, opening the door with a quiet creak. Ron hesitated for half a second, then followed. "We call it in first?" "No," Wade replied, checking his flashlight and holster. "Not until we know what it is." The forest swallowed them within seconds. The sound of gravel under boots gave way to damp leaves and brittle twigs. Ron glanced back once. Their cruiser looked small and far away now, like something left behind on purpose. "You really think it's something?" Ron asked. "I think it's been quiet too long," Wade replied. "Too quiet for Brickmont." Their flashlights cut narrow paths through the dark, illuminating tree trunks coated in moss, branches heavy with mist. A cold wind slid through the pines, whispering low and constant like breath against the ear. Each step felt slower than the last, as if the woods wanted to hold them in place. They walked for 10 more minutes before stopping at a clearing. Wade raised a hand. "Hear that?" Ron strained his ears. Nothing. Not birds. Not wind. Just the dead stillness of a place that didn't want visitors. Then a sound. A crunch like boot on leaves. Close. Both men drew their weapons. "Who's there?" Wade called out, steady and firm. No answer. Ron's breath turned shallow. He kept his sidearm raised, scanning the trees, the ground, the spaces in between. "Something ain't right," he whispered. The static on his radio popped again, then died. A twig snapped behind them. They spun. Light. Just for a second. A pale flicker between 2 trees. Then nothing. Wade moved first, stepping forward toward the last place he saw the glow. Ron stayed close behind. Each movement felt heavier. The air grew thick, and the trees leaned in tighter, like watchers holding their breath. "Wade," Ron said, his voice quieter now. "Maybe we should head back. Get back up. Something's—" A sudden burst of light, blinding, white, and brief, flashed from behind a thick trunk. A roar echoed through the trees. Then silence. The cruiser sat untouched the next morning. Its doors closed, keys still in the ignition. The radio was dead. The tires had a thin coat of mud, but no tracks around them. A coffee cup sat in the console, still half full. People arrived by the dozens. Volunteers with dogs. Helicopters chopping the sky. State troopers combing through the underbrush with sharp eyes and sharper questions. They found nothing. No signs of struggle.
No bodies. No answers.
Just silence. As weeks passed, Brickmont did what small towns do. It whispered. Rumors spread like cracks in a window, slow, branching, impossible to contain. Some said the 2 ran off. Others believed they'd been taken. A few thought they'd simply gone mad. But eventually even the rumors thinned. The case grew cold. And then colder. Only one boy refused to let it freeze. Owen Briggs sat on the edge of his bed that winter, 16 and angry, staring at a picture of his brother and Sheriff Keller in uniform. His fists clenched, his jaw locked. He didn't believe in ghosts, or accidents, or sudden disappearances. He believed in the truth, and he believed someone had buried it. Years passed. Owen left town. He joined the academy, became a detective. His name changed on badges, but the mission never did. Ron's photo stayed folded in his wallet, worn but never discarded. And now, 16 years later, as he drove down the familiar narrow road into Brickmont with pine trees pressing on either side, his heart beat harder than it had in years. The air smelled the same, with smoke and damp earth, but the town felt smaller somehow, tighter. He pulled up beside the rusted road sign that read, "Welcome to Brickmont," and sat still, engine humming, headlights casting long shadows ahead. In the rearview mirror, he saw the past. In the road ahead, the unknown. He rolled down the window, breathed in deep, and muttered to himself, "I'm gonna find out what really happened that night." Owen parked his black sedan in front of the old sheriff's station and killed the engine. The tires crunched against gravel, the sound sharp in the silence that blanketed the empty lot. A thin fog hovered low over the cracked pavement, curling around the car like smoke. He sat still for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the brick building that once held so much order, and now only held questions. He stepped out, shutting the door gently behind him, as if not to disturb something asleep. The structure looked smaller than he remembered, swallowed over time by crawling ivy and rot. Vines twisted up the walls, gripping the crumbling mortar like clenched fingers. One of the front windows was shattered, jagged glass catching the morning light like old teeth. Owen moved toward the door, his boots echoing in the stillness. It opened with a groan that seemed too loud for the quiet morning. Inside, the air was stale and thick, tinged with mildew and forgotten memories. Dust danced through beams of sunlight filtering in through cracks in the ceiling. His footsteps sent up soft clouds from the floor, which was littered with yellowing papers and faded footprints. Owen paused at the front desk. The coffee mug on its surface had a ring of black sludge at the bottom, long evaporated into mold. He touched it briefly with his fingers, then withdrew them quickly, cold and ceramic, like touching a tombstone. He moved deeper into the station, the flashlight in his hand casting a pale beam across the walls. Most of the decor had been stripped or left to rot. Crooked frames, faded badges, cork boards with curled-up flyers. One board still held old missing person notices, faces long gone, dates that felt like they belonged to a different world. He didn't recognize any of them, but he wondered how many families had sat in this same building, waiting for word, waiting like he once did. Past the break room and the old interview hall, he found the locker room. The scent of rusted metal and old sweat hit him like a memory, sharp, immediate, and unwelcome. He ran his fingers down the row until he reached the one with his brother's name still stenciled in fading black letters. R. Briggs. Locked. Owen stared at it for a moment, his jaw tightening. Then he took a step back and slammed his shoulder into the door. Once, twice. The third time it gave, metal screaming in protest. Inside, there wasn't much. An old fleece jacket, some family photos, a worn Bible with folded pages, and a manila folder tucked behind a box of ammunition. The folder was stained and brittle at the edges. As he pulled it out, the top page slid free, marked in his brother's handwriting. Slanted letters, quick strokes.
Familiar.
He sat on the locker room bench and flipped through the pages carefully. These weren't official reports.
No dates, no stamps.
Just scattered notes and names written in margin after margin. Outhouse Cabin, Turner Farm, Jake's Run. Each location brought a flicker of recognition, but one hit harder than the rest. Outhouse Hunter's Woods. Must check in person. The phrase was underlined 3 times. Owen stared at it, frozen. His pulse quickened. The outhouse. He hadn't thought of that place in years. It wasn't a bathroom, just an old shed deep in the woods that locals used for hunting or sometimes hiding. Kids made up stories about it, ghosts, rituals, animal bones. He and Ron had gone there once as teenagers, dared by a couple of older boys. It had felt like a joke then. But now, why would Ron go back there? His fingers trembled slightly as he reached into his coat and pulled out a fresh notebook. He copied down the list of names carefully, his pen scratching softly against the page. Then he circled the outhouse and underlined it, just as Ron had done. The air inside the station felt colder suddenly, the silence less empty. Owen stood, folder in hand, and slowly made his way back toward the front door. Before he stepped out, he turned and looked once more at the badge mounted on the back wall. Sheriff Wade Keller's. The brass had tarnished, but the name still glinted faintly. He stared at it a long time, not with admiration, but with suspicion. He stepped outside, the light blinding after the station's gloom. The fog was lifting, but the unease in his chest remained. It didn't feel like he was chasing shadows anymore. It felt like they were watching him. His hand trembled as he whispered, "Why would Ron go back there?" The door groaned open on rusted hinges, resisting Owen's push like it hadn't been moved in years. A cold gust of air met him, stale and metallic, stirring up dust that danced like ash in a shaft of pale light. He stepped inside the old wooden shack, boots crunching softly on a floor warped with age. The tin roof above moaned faintly with the wind, and the scent of damp rot and rust filled his nose. This wasn't just decay. It was abandonment soaked deep into the walls. His eyes adjusted slowly, guided by the beam of his flashlight. The interior was cramped, maybe 8 feet by 10, with a single rusted chair in the center and a length of chain bolted to the floor beside it. One end dangled freely, its clasp cracked and splintered like it had been forced open. A broken bottle lay nearby, its jagged edges glinting under the light. Someone had been here, and not alone. Then Owen saw it. Near the chair, half buried beneath fallen leaves and dirt, lay a small, metallic object. He crouched down, heart thudding, and brushed it clean with the edge of his sleeve. The shape hit him like a punch to the chest. A sheriff's badge, bent at the edges, stained. The once polished surface was dulled and smeared with something dark that flaked as he touched it. He didn't need a closer look to know whose it was. The name had been scratched nearly clean, but part of the last letter was still visible, K. Wade Keller. Owen's throat tightened. His hand trembled as he held the badge, feeling its weight. Not just the metal, but the memory. This wasn't just evidence. This was a piece of the man who had disappeared the same night as Ron. A man everyone else had given up on. He turned the badge over, as if expecting more, but froze as the beam from his flashlight caught something carved into the floorboards beneath it. A boat hill. A single impression burned into the wood like a scar, slightly deeper than the rest, as if someone had stood there with force. The tread pattern was faint, but sharp enough to tell it was no ordinary step. It had been made deliberately. A stomp, maybe, a warning, or a struggle. Owen slowly rose to his feet, the silence in the shack pressing in on him now, dense and unmoving. He scanned the corners again. No other signs of life, no body, no blood trail. Just that badge, that boot print, and a deep, echoing chill that settled into his spine. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, angling it to take a picture. But the screen stayed black. "What?" he muttered, tapping the side. Nothing. He held the power button.
No vas.
No light, just dead. It had been at 60% when he left the motel. Fully charged. He checked the flashlight next. Still working. He glanced back toward the door, then down at the badge again. His voice was barely above a whisper now, cracked and raw with disbelief. Someone didn't want this found. Owen Briggs stood in the long shadow of the garage's open door, his breath curling into the crisp morning air. The hum of a socket wrench echoed from inside, where a tall, broad-shouldered man in a denim shirt leaned over the open hood of an old Ford pickup. Tools clanked against metal. Oil dripped slowly into a stained pan. The scent of gasoline mixed with the sharp bite of engine grease, settling into the back of Owen's throat like old memories. Clay Mason didn't look up right away. He worked with slow, deliberate movements, as if each turn of the wrench helped him ignore the presence standing behind him. His graying hair was slicked back with sweat, jaw set firm beneath a salt and pepper beard. When he finally straightened, wiping his hands on a rag the color of rust, his eyes found Owen's without surprise, just something colder. "Didn't expect you back," Clay said, voice low, almost casual. I'm not here to talk about the past, Owen replied, stepping closer onto the cracked driveway. I'm here to find my brother. A flicker, barely there, passed across Clay's eyes. Then it was gone. He folded the rag neatly, setting it on the workbench beside a tray of spark plugs and bolts. You picked the wrong place to start poking. The wind shifted, carrying the faint creak of the trees lining the back of the property. Owen kept his tone level. Funny, the last time Ron was seen alive, he left this town with Wade Keller. And after they vanished, you moved up the ladder pretty fast. No questions. No search of your own. Clay turned his back to him, leaning over the truck again. I was doing my job. Were you? Owen stepped to the edge of the garage floor, his boots grinding against loose gravel. Because it looked like you were doing a whole lot of climbing while two good men were missing. Clay's hand paused on the edge of the hood. Then, slowly, he closed it with a dull slam and faced him fully. You want to throw accusations, do it somewhere else. Owen didn't move. The air between them thickened. The walls of the garage, lined with dusty toolboxes and old hunting photos, seemed to close in around them. Owen could feel the tension humming beneath Clay's steady posture. It wasn't just irritation. It was fear, buried deep beneath that hard exterior. I found something, Owen said quietly. Out by Hunter's Woods. Clay's jaw twitched. An old shack, Owen continued. Chains, a badge, blood. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching long enough for the sound of a bird call outside to pierce through. Clay blinked once, twice. Then his voice came out rougher, deeper. Then you'd better stop poking around Hunter's Woods. You won't like what you find. There it was, the warning, the line in the dirt. But Owen had crossed it a long time ago. He stepped closer, close enough to see the grease under Clay's fingernails. The scar under his right eye Owen hadn't remembered from years ago. What happened out there, Clay? What are you so scared of? Clay didn't answer, not with words. He turned, slow and stiff, his shoulders hunched like he carried weight that had never let up. He walked back into the garage, boots crunching over oil-stained gravel. Owen followed without hesitation, the heavy silence between them stretching tight like a wire about to snap. The inside of the garage smelled like rust, gasoline, and old regret. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting everything in a pale, flickering wash. Clay moved with purpose now, less hesitation, more resignation, as if he'd made peace with what he was about to reveal. He went to a red metal drawer on the far wall. It groaned open with a dry screech, and from the cluttered depths he pulled out a thick folder, coated in dust, no label on the front, just a single dark fingerprint smeared across the top. He placed it on the workbench between them like a coffin lid. This never made it into any official report, Clay muttered, his voice low, like gravel being dragged across concrete. His eyes didn't meet Owen's. I wasn't supposed to keep it, but I couldn't let it disappear either. Owen stepped closer. The air in the garage felt thinner now, heavy with something unseen. He opened the folder carefully. Inside were several faded photographs, old, creased, and bent at the corners. One showed a man tied to a tree, his face swollen and bloodied, shirt torn open down the middle. His arms hung limp at his sides. Rope cuts branded his wrists. Owen's breath caught in his chest. Another photo showed something stranger. A wooden post, maybe from a fence or gate, with a symbol carved deep into its surface. A circle with sharp lines inside, like triangles stacked over each other. The carving looked fresh, violent, as if someone had dragged the blade with rage instead of precision. What is this? Owen asked, his voice quieter now, wary. Clay leaned against the workbench and exhaled through his nose. His jaw worked back and forth before he spoke again. Back then, there was a group, he said slowly. Men from town, old families, not the kind that showed up in the papers or church bulletins. They kept quiet, stayed out of trouble, but everyone knew they had power, influence. Owen frowned. A cult? Clay shook his head once. Not quite. More like, they believed the land had power. That blood opened doors. He let that sit for a moment. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the space between them. Owen could feel a tension building in his spine, the same kind he felt at crime scenes where things didn't add up. Wade started asking too many questions. Clay continued, voice rough, fingers nervously rubbing his temple. He dragged Ron into it, started following leads, visiting places late at night, asking the wrong people about the right things. Then, one night they were gone. Owen's hands clenched the edge of the workbench. The photographs, the badge, the trail of personal notes left behind like breadcrumbs Ron never got to finish. "You knew," Owen said, his voice low but sharp. "You knew something was wrong, and you said nothing." Clay nodded, slow and bitter. "Because I wanted to live." The words landed with a dull weight, honest and rotten. Owen studied him. The lines in Clay's face weren't from age. They were from silence. 16 years of it. The light above buzzed louder. A moth thudded against the bulb, again and again, refusing to stop. "I don't think Wade and Ron stumbled into anything," Owen said, his tone darker now. "I think they were pulled in, targeted." Clay didn't argue. His silence was enough to confirm it. Owen took a step back and looked again at the photos, the folder, the man who had stayed quiet for nearly 2 decades. "You're still hiding something?" Owen said, voice steady but edged with steel. Clay's eyes finally lifted to meet his. There was no anger in them, just weariness and fear. "You don't want to dig deeper," he said softly. "Some graves don't like being disturbed." The floor groaned beneath Owen's boots as he forced the crowbar under a warped board and pried it up with a heavy crack. Dust spiraled upward, catching in the beam of his flashlight like drifting ash. Beneath the floorboards of the old outhouse, he found exactly what the map in the library had promised: a rusted metal hatch, half sunken into the earth and covered in mold. He knelt beside it, the wooden planks creaking under his weight, and ran a gloved hand over the corroded lock. It was ancient, crusted with dirt and orange flake, but not impenetrable. Bracing himself, Owen wedged the flat end of the crowbar between the hasp and lock. He pushed hard, teeth clenched, arms shaking with effort until the metal gave way with a sharp snap. The hatch popped open an inch and exhaled a long, stale breath of underground air that hit him like a punch, damp, earthy, and tinged with something he couldn't quite place. Not decay, not mildew, something older, something buried. He pulled the hatch fully open and shined his flashlight into the darkness below. A narrow stone shaft led downward, with a rusted ladder bolted into the side. Owen hesitated only a second, then lowered himself in, one rung at a time. The chill bit through his jacket as he descended. His breath fogged in front of him. The bottom came quickly, and he found himself standing in a low tunnel, the stone walls slick with condensation. Water dripped steadily somewhere in the distance. He adjusted his flashlight, the beam jittering over jagged stone and shallow puddles. It was colder down here, the kind of cold that settled into your bones. He moved slowly, eyes scanning every corner, every crack in the wall. Symbols began to appear, faint carvings etched into the damp stone. Triangles inside circles. Repeating patterns that seemed deliberate, maybe even ritualistic. He paused at one, running his fingers over the grooves. They were old, worn smooth by time. Further down the passage, the carvings became more complex. Names, initials, dates. One stopped him cold. W.K. R.B. November 6th, 08. His breath caught. Wade Keller. Ron Briggs. The day they disappeared. His pulse quickened. He backed away, heart pounding, as if the wall itself had spoken their names aloud. It wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just an old maintenance tunnel. It was a record, a memorial, or maybe a warning. He crouched low, snapping a photo with his phone, but the screen flickered. Then again, his light stuttered. "No, no, no, don't do this now," he muttered, giving the flashlight a hard shake. Steadied, for the moment, he pushed forward, the tunnel closing in tighter around him. The ceiling dripped water that tapped on his shoulders like cold fingers. He could hear his own footsteps, But then another sound layered in, light but distinct. Footsteps. Behind him. He froze. Owen slowly turned, flashlight cutting through the narrow passage. Nothing but stone and shadow. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts. He wasn't imagining it. The sound was too deliberate, too human. "Hello?" he called out, voice low, steady despite the tightness in his throat. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then came a soft scuff. Then stillness. He stepped backward slowly, heart hammering, eyes never leaving the tunnel's mouth behind him. Every instinct in him screamed to run, but he couldn't, not yet. Something moved in the edge of the light. He snapped around, nothing. A draft swept through the tunnel, cold and sudden, like a breath against his neck. The flashlight flickered again. "Come on," he whispered, tapping it. The beam steadied just long enough to show him something new. A handprint, faint, smeared in grime along the stone wall. Fresh. The smudge dragged downward, as if someone had stumbled. Owen swallowed hard. They weren't just here. They were brought down here. The moment Owen stepped into the chamber, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just the cool breath of underground air. It felt like stepping into a place forgotten by time. Dust hung in the beams of weak sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling, casting long streaks across the room like old scars. The chamber stretched wider than he expected, carved roughly into the earth, its walls a patchwork of stone and rotted wood. And at the center of it all, like something out of a fever dream, stood the altar. It was crude, just slabs of dark wood bound together by rusted nails. But the surface was stained with something that had soaked deep into the grain. The smell hit him first. Old metal, like pennies soaked in water, mixed with rot. Owen stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel and bone fragments, his flashlight beam steady but narrow. Symbols lined the walls, triangles inside circles, loops of lines that bent in ways his mind didn't want to follow. Some were names, others scratched so deep they broke the stone. He paused at one. W.K. R.B. November 6, 08. Wade Keller. Ron Briggs. The night they vanished. His breath caught. He raised his phone to snap a photo. Click. Another. Then something shimmered beneath the altar. He knelt slowly, brushing away a layer of thick dust. Embedded into the base, half swallowed by time and wood, was a key, old, brass, and stamped with markings he couldn't read. It didn't belong here. Or maybe it belonged more than anything ever had. His fingers closed around it, tugging gently. It resisted at first. The wood had nearly fused around it, but a sharp twist gave way with a loud snap. As the key came free, a low rumble pulsed through the ground, subtle at first, like a passing truck overhead. But this wasn't surface noise. It came from the walls, the floor, the very breath of the place. Owen shot to his feet. Crack. A wooden beam above him splintered. Dust rained down. He turned, heart racing, instinct screaming. His foot struck something soft yet solid beneath the rocks piled beside the altar. He fell hard. The impact jarred his shoulder and knocked the air from his lungs. He rolled onto his side, gasping, eyes drawn to the thing he'd tripped over. The rocks had shifted, revealing white beneath gray. Not stone. Bone. The pile collapsed further as he pushed himself back. More bones, long, splintered femurs, vertebrae scattered like dropped coins, and 3 skulls. He stared. The first had a fractured jaw broken clean through. The second was missing part of its crown. The third, smaller, too small, and cracked straight down the middle. A child? His throat tightened. A wave of nausea surged as he backed against the nearest wall. His mind spun, trying to fit this into logic, into law, into anything he could handle. But this wasn't a crime scene. This was something else. Something ritualistic, measured, deliberate. He fumbled for his phone, shaking fingers, sweaty palms, but the screen stayed dark, dead. It had been at half charge just minutes ago. He clicked it again. Nothing. They knew. Someone didn't want this found. Then a noise. A scrape. Metal on wood. Owen froze, still crouched beside the altar. The sound came from above the hatch. He turned slowly, eyes drawn to the beam of light now spilling down the tunnel ladder. A figure appeared, silhouette framed in sunlight. The outline was unmistakable, broad shoulders, sheriff's hat tilted forward, and in his hands, a shovel. "Told you not to dig," the voice said, calm and cold. Owen rose to his feet slowly, sweat clinging to his neck, heart hammering in his chest. "Clay?" he called up, voice unsteady but loud enough to echo. The sheriff didn't move at first, just stood at the lip of the opening like a statue. "What is this, Clay?" Owen shouted again, trying to steady his breath, forcing authority into his tone. "What did you bury down here?" Clay stepped forward, shovel handle resting against his shoulder. His face was unreadable, neither angry nor remorseful, just tired, hollowed out, like a man who'd carried too many secrets for too long. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "This is the debt we pay to keep Brickmont clean." If that moment sent chills down your spine, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because uncovering the truth requires courage. Owen lunged up the ladder, boots slamming against the narrow metal rungs, hands slipping on sweat-slicked rails. Clay's silhouette loomed above, one hand gripping the hatch, the other lifting the shovel like a guillotine. Just as the hatch began to slam shut, Owen burst through the opening and shoved the door wide, the impact throwing Clay off balance. They crashed into the dirt together, a tangle of limbs and breathless fury. The forest air was damp, filled with the sharp tang of moss and sweat. Clay swung the shovel, but Owen caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted hard. The tool clattered to the ground. He shoved Clay onto his back and straddled him, pinning his arms with trembling strength. "Who are you protecting?" Owen hissed, his face inches from the older man's. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut deep, like a blade pressed against the skin, daring the truth to bleed out. Clay didn't struggle. His body went slack beneath Owen's weight. His chest rose and fell slowly, and for a moment he just looked tired, older, smaller. The fight had drained from his eyes. "You think this town's peaceful by accident?" Clay rasped. His voice was hoarse, cracked like gravel underfoot. "You think crime just skips Brickmont? Someone made that happen." Owen's jaw clenched. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. Clay's lips curled, not into a smile, but something bitter and resigned. "And now it's your turn to carry it." Owen stared at him, really stared. There was no pride in Clay's voice.
No conviction.
Just the weight of someone who had made a choice a long time ago and never stopped paying for it. "No," Owen said, voice steady. "I'm ending this." He pulled the zip ties from his coat pocket, tightened them around Clay's wrists, then hauled him to his feet. Clay didn't resist. He walked like a man headed for the gallows, shoulders low, steps slow. Owen shoved him into the back seat of his sedan, slammed the door shut, and got behind the wheel. Gravel crunched as he pulled away from the clearing, headlights slicing through the darkened forest road. The silence inside the car was thick. Clay didn't say a word. He stared out the window like a ghost. Owen's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Every muscle in his body buzzed with adrenaline, but his mind was focused. He had a witness. He had a confession. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Then he saw them. Headlights in the mirror too close. One set, then two, then three. "Come on," Owen muttered, pressing harder on the gas. The trucks behind him didn't back off. They tightened their formation, one behind, two flanking. Within seconds, he was boxed in. "Hold on," he snapped to Clay. Not because he cared, but because instinct told him things were about to get bad. A black pickup to his right veered sharply. Tires squealed. Owen swerved, but the left side truck cut in. The one behind nudged his bumper, just enough to make the steering wheel jerk. "No, no, no," Owen tried to correct, but it was too late. The sedan fishtailed, rear end skidding across the road before slamming into a ditch. The impact snapped his neck sideways. The engine hissed. His door was pinned against a tree. He reached for his weapon, but the doors flew open first. Men stepped out of the trucks, all dressed in camouflage and brown hunting jackets. Faces streaked in paint. Silent. Coordinated. Mechanical. Owen barely had time to shout before they yanked Clay from the back seat. He hit the dirt hard, groaning as he tried to sit up. One of the men raised a rifle. "Wait!" Owen barked, voice raw with panic. "He's coming forward. He's helping." The man didn't blink. The shot cracked like a hammer breaking glass. Clay's head jerked, and he crumpled, face first into the mud. No scream. No plea. Just silence. "Clay!" Owen yelled, struggling against the man holding him. Another swung a heavy arm into his temple. White-hot pain. The forest spun. He hit the ground hard, cheek scraping rock, breath knocked from his chest. His fingers dug into the soil, trying to stay conscious. He heard movement. A voice, low and close, slithered into his ear. Some secrets die with the willing. Owen's eyes snapped open to a sharp, blinding light filtering through the trees above him. Cold dirt pressed against his cheek, and his body ached like he'd fallen from a moving truck. His wrists were bound in front of him with rough rope, the fibers biting into the skin, now raw and bleeding. His head pulsed with a heavy, rhythmic throb. He'd been hit hard. He blinked rapidly, struggling to steady his breath as the forest around him came into focus. The woods were quiet, too quiet. Morning birdsong floated above like a cruel joke, chirping innocence into a place that reeked of something far worse. A patch of dried blood crusted his temple. He shifted, groaning, and pushed himself into a sitting position against the base of an old oak tree. His muscles screamed with protest, his clothes torn and soaked with dew. His car was gone. The road was nowhere in sight. So was Clay's body. So was everything. His first instinct was panic. They hadn't killed him, but they wanted him to know how easily they could have. Every part of this had been staged, rehearsed. A warning dressed as mercy. Owen forced his breathing to slow, leaning his head back against the bark. He had to think, get his bearings. He flexed his fingers, stiff, but no broken bones. His boots were still on. That mattered more than anyone might guess. With shaking fingers, he bent his leg toward him and dug into the inner seam of his right boot, heart pounding. There. Cold metal. Smooth edges. The key. They didn't know he'd kept it. Relief flickered through him, brief but powerful. He tucked the key back into its hiding place, his fingers trembling. If nothing else, he still had that. Whatever it unlocked, whatever door, lockbox or lie, it was now the only thread left in a web rapidly unraveling. He rose to his feet, dizzy and unsteady. Blood rushed to his head and he stumbled forward, catching himself on a branch. No phone, no car,
No backup.
just woods, silence, and a trail he had to find himself. Step by step, he began the hike back toward Brickmont. The distance felt longer than 5 miles. The sun had climbed higher by the time he reached the edge of the tree line, his shirt clinging to him with sweat, dust coating his face like ash. A pair of joggers passed on the far road, laughing at something on one of their phones. They didn't even look his way. He kept walking. By the time he reached Jasper Lane's auto repair shop, a squat brick building with a rusted tow truck parked outside, his legs were ready to give out. The bell over the door jingled as he stumbled in. Grease and coffee filled the air, the scent grounding him in something real.
Familiar.
Behind the counter stood Jasper himself, grizzled, broad-shouldered, and still wearing his faded reserve deputy badge on a chain under his work shirt. He looked up from a set of engine parts and froze. Owen. The name came out slow, confused. Then Jasper saw the bruises, the blood, the way Owen stood like someone holding back a collapse. Sit down, Jasper said firmly, grabbing a towel and a bottle of water from the counter. Owen obeyed without a word, sinking into the nearest chair. The moment his weight hit it, his body exhaled as if in surrender. Jasper crouched in front of him. What happened to you? Owen stared at the floor for a beat. Then he looked up, eyes sharper than they had any right to be in that moment. I found something, he said, voice hoarse. A key. Something they didn't want me to see. Jasper's brow furrowed. He handed over the towel, nodding slowly. You're lucky to be breathing. They left me there on purpose, Owen said. They wanted me to know I wasn't in control, that they could wipe everything clean and leave me with nothing. Except the key, Jasper muttered. Owen looked him dead in the eye. Except the key. Jasper stood and walked to the back of the shop. A few seconds later, he returned with a phone and a mug of black coffee. Use the landline, he said, sliding it across the table. And drink that. You look like you've been to war. Owen took the mug in both hands, warmth seeping into his fingers. He stared into the dark liquid like it might show him the next step. His heartbeat steadied, the silence around them no longer pressing, just present. Jasper didn't press him for more, didn't ask questions. That was the thing about old friends. They knew when silence mattered more than answers. Owen raised the mug, took a long sip, and set it down with finality. Then he looked at Jasper, jaw tight, voice steady. I'm about to go back. The key turned with a hesitant click, and Owen's breath caught in his throat. His hand trembled slightly as he eased the lockbox open, the metal groaning like it hadn't been touched in decades. A stale gust of air escaped as the lid rose, carrying the scent of old paper and rust. Inside, nestled beneath layers of dust, was a stack of yellowed ledgers bound in cracking leather, several photo negatives tucked into brittle sleeves, and a small, black cassette recorder, its surface scratched and faded but intact. Owen glanced over his shoulder, half expecting movement in the shadows. The grain mill was deathly quiet, its walls thick with silence and history. Every creak in the ceiling felt like a footstep. Every gust of wind that slipped through broken glass sounded like a breath held too long. With a deep inhale, he reached in and grabbed the recorder. It was surprisingly cold, as if the secrets it held had chilled it from the inside. He turned it over, saw the faint label, RB, written in Ron's handwriting, the looped R instantly familiar. His stomach tightened. He pressed the play button. A grainy hum filled the air, followed by a voice, shaky, tired, but unmistakably Ron's. If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. Owen froze. The voice was like a ghost reaching out from the dark, dragging him back to nights spent watching Ron pace their porch, muttering about unfinished cases and gut feelings. They're not a cult, Ron continued. They're businessmen, judges, cops, landowners. The order isn't about faith. It's about leverage. Owen leaned in, the recorder close to his ear. His heart pounded in rhythm with Ron's words. They have their hands in everything. Land deals, arrests, town funding. It's a web, and every thread leads back to Black Hollow. I thought we could stop them, me and Wade. But we were wrong. We didn't understand how deep it went. There was a pause, like Ron was catching his breath, or bracing for something. They kill anyone who steps out of line. Owen's hands clenched. The tape crackled. Then came a sudden bang, loud, sharp, like a door slamming open. The sound of wood splintering. Ron's voice rose in panic. No, wait! Silence. The tape clicked to a stop. Owen stared at the recorder, his throat dry, a hollow ache forming behind his ribs. He sat back on his heels, still gripping the device like it might somehow bring Ron back. The dust in the room seemed to thicken, settling on his skin, his clothes, his very bones. This wasn't just a voice from the past. It was proof. Proof that Ron hadn't just vanished. He'd been hunted. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, struggling to steady his breathing. The photo negatives caught his eye next. He lifted one to the light trickling in from the high, cracked windows. The image was hard to make out, blurry figures in robes, a symbol etched into the floor. The same hollow circle inside a triangle he had seen in the tunnel. Another showed a handshake between two men, one of whom looked eerily familiar, like the county judge Owen had seen in press clippings from a decade ago. He snapped a few shots with his burner phone and slid the contents into his bag. This was no longer about closure. It was about exposure. They hadn't just silenced Ron. They'd built an entire town on secrecy and blood. He stood slowly, the floor beneath him creaking like a warning. With the recorder in one hand and the ledgers tucked under his arm, he made his way back through the grain mill, boots crunching glass and dirt. He didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, focused. He was already thinking ahead to who he could trust, where to store these files, how to protect what he now knew. But the sound wouldn't leave his ears. That final bang. That final breath. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass like whispers trying to chase him down. He looked up at the rusted Whitmore sign swinging overhead and whispered under his breath. "They got him?" Owen whispered. The tooth glinted in the weak light like a shard of truth too stubborn to stay buried. Owen held it between his fingers, brushing off the thin layer of dirt with his thumb. It was small, yellowed with age, but unmistakable, a molar capped in gold. He turned it slightly. His breath caught when he saw it. 3 tiny letters etched into the metal. CM Clay Mason. His pulse quickened. The dirt floor beneath him suddenly felt unsteady, like the world had shifted a few inches off balance. He stared at the tooth, then at the scattered remains. That was Clay. That had to be Clay, which meant the man he zip-tied, the man who'd bled in his backseat, the man shot in front of him. That wasn't Clay. Owen staggered back, his boots crunching over loose gravel and bone fragments. He stood there for a moment, the chamber around him impossibly still, except for the drip of condensation from the stone ceiling. A sick feeling twisted in his gut, coiling like a snake. He'd been face to face with a stranger, someone who had worn Clay's badge, his uniform, his voice like a second skin. Someone who had walked the town for years pretending to be a man already dead. How many others had known? How deep did the lie run? His fingers trembled as he slid the tooth into a plastic evidence bag and sealed it shut. Every step he took back toward the tunnel entrance felt heavier, like the weight of the dead was hitching a ride in his chest. But then he froze. A soft click echoed behind him, sharp and deliberate. Owen turned slowly, flashlight beam sweeping the stone. It caught a glint of metal, the barrel of a pistol, half hidden in the shadows near the tunnel mouth. And just beyond it, stepping forward with the slow confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment, was the man he thought he'd left in the dirt. He wore the same sheriff's coat, the same boots. But there was something different now, no more mask of authority. No more tired eyes or cautious words. Just a cold stare and a mouth set in a thin, steady line. "You shouldn't have come back," the fake Clay said. His voice was the same, but the weight behind it was gone.
No pretense.
No fear. Behind him, 2 more men emerged, one tall and wiry, the other stocky with a heavy limp. Both wore dark jackets, the red-stitched circle Owen had only seen once before, inside the tunnel. Their eyes were hard, flat, unfeeling. Owen stepped back instinctively, his hand moving toward the crowbar strapped to his side. His voice stayed low, even. "I know who you are. I know what you've done." The fake Clay tilted his head. "Do you? You know a name, maybe, a face. But you don't know the weight of what's underneath." Owen's jaw tightened. "I know enough. I know Clay's dead. I know you've been hiding in his skin for 16 years. And I know you buried him in that chamber like he was trash." A flicker of emotion crossed the imposter's face, just for a second. Disgust? Pity? Passed too quickly to tell. The man stepped closer. "He was a necessary sacrifice," he said, voice calm. "So was Wade. So was Ron. Some men live to serve. Others live to protect what must be served. You still don't understand that." Owen's knuckles whitened around the crowbar. His breath was slow, measured, but inside his head, thoughts were firing like gunshots. He was outnumbered, outarmed, and too deep in the woods to call for help. But he wasn't empty-handed. Not this time. "They died for nothing," Owen said, "and I'm going to drag that truth into the light." The man smiled, thin, humorless. "You think light saves people?" he said, stepping even closer. "Light only blinds. Real power lives in the dark, where it listens, where it waits." The men behind him moved in silently, like shadows peeling off the wall. One drew a blade from his hip. The other raised a bolt-action rifle, finger resting just outside the trigger guard. Owen didn't run. Not yet. Not until he had to. He took one slow step backward. His heel brushed against the rusted metal edge of the hatch he had come through. Still open. Still his way out. But if he bolted now, they'd chase. And if they chased, he'd have to choose, fight or vanish. He tightened his grip. The crowbar was slick with sweat, but solid. "This isn't over," he said, staring the imposter in the eye. The fake Clay nodded once, like a man sealing a deal he already knew the terms of. "No," he said softly. "But for you, it's close." Then he raised the pistol. Owen spun, dropped low, and dove through the hatch before the shot rang out. It echoed like thunder in the tight stone chamber. Dust flew. A spark crackled off the wall. He hit the tunnel floor hard and rolled, scrambling up with one knee bloodied, flashlight in his mouth, crowbar in one hand. He sprinted down the corridor, not looking back. Not yet. Just the sound of his boots and his breath and the distant voices growing louder behind him. But in his mind, there was only one thought. "This goes deeper than I thought," Owen said aloud. Then a voice behind him said, "You shouldn't have come back." It was the fake Clay. And this time he wasn't alone. The imposter sheriff stepped forward first, the loose gravel under his boots crunching like bone under pressure. His eyes never left Owen's, cold, gray, unreadable. Behind him, two other men flanked either side. One cradled a bolt-action rifle with quiet confidence, his finger grazing the trigger guard. The other twirled a long hunting blade lazily in his hand, the metal catching stray rays of sun that filtered through the canopy above. All three wore the same black jackets, faded at the seams but unmistakable in their design. Stitched onto each shoulder was a red circle with a hollow center. Owen's breath caught. The symbol from the altar, from the tunnel, from the badge. The truth stood in front of him now in the flesh. "You killed them," Owen said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Wade, Ron, the real Clay." The fake sheriff smiled, not with joy, but with something colder.
Bride.
"Correction," he said slowly, enunciating every syllable like a lesson being taught. "We preserved Brickmont. Some men just had to disappear to make that happen." Owen's heart slammed in his chest. His mind scanned for options, escape paths, weapons, cover. Trees were too thin, rocks too far. He needed a distraction. They stepped closer. "You think peace comes without a price?" the imposter asked, eyes narrowing. "Your brother didn't." The rifle clicked as its wielder chambered around. Owen's window was closing fast. His gaze dropped for half a second. The handle of a rusted shovel jutted from a nearby pile of collapsed fence posts. No time to think. Just move. With a sudden shout, Owen dove, grabbed the shovel and swung in one fluid arc. The flat edge connected with the rifleman's knee, bone crunched, and the man screamed, folding sideways. The gun fired, the shot wild, tearing through leaves above Owen's head. He didn't wait. He ran. Branches whipped across his face as he crashed through the woods, lungs burning, legs pumping. Every breath scraped like fire in his chest. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. The shouts behind him were enough. The forest floor turned uneven. Roots twisted beneath his boots, trying to trip him. He stumbled once, caught himself, and pushed harder. The ranger tower loomed in the distance, weathered, tall, its wooden frame half swallowed by time. It was his only shot. He reached the base, threw open the creaking door, and bolted up the steps two at a time. At the top, he kicked the hatch shut and wedged a broken beam through the latch. It wouldn't hold forever. He turned to the ancient radio panel, heart hammering against his ribs. Dusted dials, a cracked microphone, but the red power light still glowed faintly. "Come on," he muttered, flicking switches. Static roared, then steadied. He pressed the mic button. "This is Detective Owen Briggs," he said, voice strained but sharp. "Brickmont is compromised. I have names. Proof. Send backup to Hunter's Woods immediately." He released the button. Silence. Then a crackle of static, nothing else. Below, the door rattled. Wood splintered. "They're coming," he whispered, sweat rolling down his neck. His eyes landed on the emergency kit near the window. Inside, a flare gun, bright red, loaded. He turned it over in his hands, stepped to the center of the room, and looked up. The dry wood roof had soaked up years of sun. One spark would do it. The tower shook as footsteps climbed the stairs. Owen steadied his breath, lifted the flare gun, and aimed at the ceiling. You want to burn the truth? Let's burn it all. The flare gun fired with a sharp hiss, and within seconds, the dry wood overhead exploded into flame. A surge of orange and red roared across the Ranger Tower's roof, licking upward as thick smoke billowed into the early evening sky. The attackers below shouted in alarm, stumbling back as embers rained down like angry sparks. Owen didn't flinch. He turned from the blaze and bolted for the trapdoor at the tower's far side, boots thudding across the wooden planks. The handle groaned in protest, but he yanked it open and climbed down the cold steel ladder, his palms scraping against the rungs. Heat pressed at his back, the fire chasing him in loud, hungry crackles. His heart pounded, each beat echoing in his ears louder than the sirens in the distance. He landed in the dirt and ducked into the thick brush behind the tower, crawling low as shadows danced across the trees. He didn't look back. There was no time. He ran. Branches clawed at his jacket, slicing his forearms. He kept going. Every breath burned, lungs raw from smoke and adrenaline. He pushed deeper into the woods until the sounds behind him, shouting, boots, the roar of fire, faded into the quiet crunch of leaves underfoot. It wasn't silence. It was survival. After a mile, he slowed. A clearing opened ahead, safe for now. Owen dropped to his knees, unzipped the pouch at his side, and checked the contents. His brother's cassette, the file pages, the photographs, the key, the camera. Everything was intact. Ashes clung to his sleeves, his cheeks streaked with sweat and soot. He exhaled hard. It worked, he whispered, though the shaking in his voice betrayed just how close it hadn't. 15 minutes later, the sky roared with rotor blades. Helicopters cut across the horizon, floodlights sweeping over the treetops. Sirens rose behind them, distant but growing, police cruisers, fire trucks, ambulances. Owen stood slowly and moved toward the Ranger Tower again, this time from the south slope, where responders had started to gather. Paramedic rushed over. You from the tower? Owen nodded. Detective Owen Briggs. I made the call. His voice was hoarse, but his eyes were steady. He handed over his badge and pointed toward the woods. There's evidence hidden in a chamber beneath the old outhouse, southeast clearing. 3 bodies tied to the order. I have more documents, a recording, and names. The man blinked, caught off guard by the calm urgency in Owen's tone. Right away, he said, flagging 2 nearby officers. In the chaos that followed, Owen stayed quiet, watching as the fire was finally beaten down by water cannons and smoke eaters. The flames had eaten through the tower, collapsing one side into a smoldering ruin. No sign of the attackers. They'd scattered or burned. But Owen didn't care about them now. He had what he came for. By nightfall, a full task force from the state had descended on Brickmont. Unmarked cars, armored vans, investigators with clipboards and body cams fanned out across town. 6 men were arrested within the first 48 hours. 2 councilmen, 1 judge, a retired police captain, a local banker, and a school superintendent. When their names were announced on the news, Brickmont nearly stopped breathing. 3 days later, a call came from a farmer on the outskirts. An abandoned barn. The body of a man hung by the neck with a belt. It was the imposter sheriff. No ID, no note, no vehicle nearby. Whoever had strung him up had done it fast, clean, and without witnesses. Owen sat at Jasper's repair shop when he got the call. He stared out the window, jaw tight, hands clenched. Jasper placed a quiet hand on his shoulder but said nothing. They both knew what it meant. Someone higher up, someone who hadn't been caught, was still pulling strings. The message was clear. Brickmont wasn't clean yet, just exposed. Still, the trial went forward. Every network carried it. The courtroom was packed. Testimonies were brutal. The order, as Owen had described it, was no longer some whispered tale in the dark. It was a system, a legacy. one that fed on silence. Owen testified last. When he stood at the witness stand, holding the bent sheriff's badge, he didn't speak as a detective. He spoke as a brother. They made this town a lie. My brother gave his life trying to tell the truth. I'm here so no one forgets that. The courtroom was quiet when he finished. Not a single camera clicked. Not a single cough. Just the sound of justice finally being heard. Weeks later, after the dust had settled and the trials concluded, Owen visited the hill behind the church, where a new stone marker stood among the old graves. He knelt beside it, brushing away the spring leaves that had gathered at its base. The name read, Ronald Briggs, Deputy Brother Truth Seeker. Owen pressed his hand against the cool stone and whispered, "Now you can rest." Owen sat still on the wooden porch swing, the groan of rusted chains the only sound breaking the late summer hush. The sun was low, painting the sky in strokes of burnt orange and lavender, casting long shadows across the overgrown front yard. A mug of coffee, untouched and cooling, rested on the railing beside him. The house, once Ron's, now his, stood silent behind him, freshly painted but hollow. Inside, it smelled of sawdust and old pine, the result of months spent restoring what was lost. But Owen knew better than anyone. Paint couldn't patch ghosts. A breeze swept through the trees lining the edge of the property, their branches swaying gently like they were whispering to each other. He scanned the tree-line, his eyes lingering on a spot between two oaks. There was nothing there, but something about the stillness of that space kept tugging at him. His fingers curled instinctively around the small iron key hanging from his neck, thumbing the grooves carved into its surface. The key was cold, even in the warmth of the evening, a constant weight on his chest, not heavy, but ever-present, just like the silence that had settled over Brickmont since the trials. Owen exhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the cracked pavement of the driveway. Jasper's pickup truck sat parked there, engine ticking faintly as it cooled. His friend had stopped by earlier with 2 cold beers and a box of old photographs from their academy days. They'd sat in silence for most of it, flipping through memories without speaking them aloud. Now Jasper was inside, likely dozing off in the armchair Ron used to love. A man who had once helped rebuild a town now sought comfort in the soft clink of bottles and the muted flicker of a baseball game on the old TV. But Owen wasn't tired. His body was still, but his mind never stopped moving. He traced the rim of the mug, then let his gaze follow the road that curved away from the house, down toward Main Street. Things were changing fast. Storefronts had new names. Old family homes were up for sale. Outsiders were coming in, some curious, others just looking for cheap land with a story to tell. But none of them knew what the land had cost. None of them smelled the blood in the soil, even when it rained. The porch creaked beneath him as he shifted, glancing at the window beside the door. His reflection stared back, older than he remembered, tired in a way that didn't sleep off. There was gray in his beard now, and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when he first came back to Brickmont. 16 years was a long time to chase ghosts, but catching them didn't mean peace. The sharp ring of bicycle spokes broke his thoughts. He turned his head slowly. A boy? 10, maybe 11, rode past on a dusty blue bike, one hand steering, the other waving. "Evenin', sir," the boy called, his voice bright. Owen raised a hand in return, the motion slow but deliberate. "Evenin'," he replied, forcing a small smile. The boy disappeared around the bend, the wheels clicking faintly until they were gone. Owen's smile faded. He looked back toward the trees again, the same spot. Still nothing. Just the movement of leaves, the shimmer of heat rising off the grass. But his gut twisted anyway. His instincts had never really turned off, and something in the quiet tonight felt wrong. He stood up, the porch boards groaning beneath his weight. For a moment he considered walking to the tree-line, just to be sure, just to quiet the hum in the back of his mind. But then Jasper knocked lightly on the screen door behind him. "Still out here?" the older man said, his voice hoarse from years of welding and chewing tobacco. Owen nodded without turning. "Just thinking." Jasper stepped outside, cracking his knuckles as he moved beside him. He glanced toward the trees too, but didn't say anything about them. Maybe he felt it. Maybe he didn't. "You ready to let it go?" Jasper asked quietly. Owen paused, gripping the railing. "No," he said finally, "but I'm ready to live with it." The two men stood in silence as the last rays of sunlight sank behind the hills. Crickets had started their nightly chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then went quiet. Jasper eventually patted him on the shoulder and went back inside. Owen didn't follow. He sat back down, the swing moving slightly with his weight, and stared again at the woods. His fingers brushed the key once more. For a second, just a second, he saw it. A shape, tall and unmoving, just beyond the first line of trees. He blinked. Gone. His pulse steadied. His eyes narrowed. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was everything. He didn't stand, didn't chase it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes and whispered, "Some truths never die. They just wait to be found." The answers were hidden, but now they're out. If you stand for truth and justice, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to explore the mystery of lost truths and the power of uncovering long-hidden secrets. Its purpose is to inspire conversations about justice, the impact of unresolved mysteries, and the search for answers.